Welcome, everybody. I'm Zeus Kerravala from ZK Research, and I'm here for another ZKast video episode. This is part of my thought leadership series where I interview interesting people from different tech companies, and just talk about some of the things going on in tech. And so today, I've got Rajeev Shah, co-founder and CEO of Celona Networks. Rajeev, why don't you say hi and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what Solona does.
Hi, Zeus. Thank you for having me on ZKast. This is awesome. Celona is a young company, about 2 years old, exclusively right now focused on the concept of private mobile networks, which we think is really the next generation of networking for enterprise. Excited to be here to talk to you.
Good. And as always, I want to remind everybody that these ZKast videos are done in conjunction with a media partner, eWeek, as part of their eSpeak series. Now, Rajeev, you talked about, I have talked to you guys a little bit about what you're thinking, and I know one of the terms that you've been using is this concept of the edgeless enterprise. Now, that's an interesting term because all I hear about whenever I go to any or attend any virtual conference now is the edge. And so here you guys are talking about the edgeless enterprise. So explain, what exactly is the edgeless enterprise?
Yeah, it is. It's probably the most hot term that is the least understood as well, right? And so it's an interesting concept. For us, the concept of edgeless enterprise is born out of this concept that it's a little artificial to say that an enterprise has an edge. Like, where do you draw that line? Is it wherever your physical on-premises is? Or is it where your logical boundaries go? Do you want to define your edge in the cloud? Do you want to define it in your data center? You want to define it in each of your branch offices?
I think everything's the edge.
Yeah, everywhere there is the edge for that matter. And so to us, by having this artificial definition of edge, we are force-fitting kind of these siloed, narrow architectures into different models, depending on where the user is and where the application is. And to us, that stops to make sense as we go forward. We need to think of a little bit more fluid and a more dynamic definition of this edge, because in reality, the edge is wherever your application needs to be, and it changes all the time. And hence, we came up with this term called the edgeless enterprise to avoid falling for the trap for these artificial definitions of the edge.
Yeah, I guess it's that's sort of the other side of the coin. You could say the edge is everywhere, or you can say the enterprise is edges. It's very much like with security and where the perimeter is, right? Some people will say the enterprise is perimeterless, and otherwise people will say the perimeter is everywhere. So
that's right.
I guess it's the same kind of theme. Now, when you introduced Celona, you said you were a private enterprise private mobile, but what you're really talking about is 5G, right? So how does 5G fit into the edgeless enterprise?
Yeah, it's a really interesting concept. 5G, one of the most fascinating things about it is, there's a lot talked about the radio technology, and it's phenomenal radio technology. It does things at a radio layer that honestly have not been done before. But one of the things that I think has not gotten enough attention is 5G is the first technology standard in the networking world that has been born truly in the cloud era. It was not something that came out of some antiquated standards and so on. The implication of that is all these technologists, really smart people, really said, what happens if you take all of these cloud native concepts of microservices and scale out models and agile business models and truly apply it to networking, not just manage the networking from the cloud, but actually apply it to the networking services. And that part of 5G was primarily back then intended to say, let's revolutionize the telecom sector that needs innovation. But when you think about it, it is exactly the same innovation that enterprise networks are looking to do to keep themselves agile enough to keep up with the application demand. And to us, the entry point of private 5G into the enterprise gives us as an industry the opportunity to make use of all of those technology architectural advantages and really rethink how can we design an enterprise network. And that's where, to us, the concept of 5G and edgeless enterprise really start to meet in our minds.
So I want to see if you can maybe double click on that concept of cloud networking. cloud networking is a term that's as broadly used today as edge or cloud, right? And a lot of vendors, as I think you kind of hinted at this, talk about cloud management as being cloud networking, although the architectural structure of the network is still the same. You just move the network management to the cloud. What you're talking about is actually using cloud native principles to design the network, correct? Can you go into a little detail on that?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Look, all our lives in networking, we are taught there is three planes, right? Data plane, control plane, management plane. That's been drilled into all our heads. And fundamentally, over the last decade, starting with cloud Wi-Fi, we have successfully taken pretty much all of the management plane to the cloud, portions of the control plane to the cloud, right, with limited success. And we've kind of stopped there and we have stalled. We haven't been able to go beyond. And the net impact of that is we have simplified management of these things, but the reality of what a network manager faces today is every time a new application or a new category of application hits, they have to go rethink, how did we do the data plane? Where does the data need to go? Is it still getting all the right security policies? Did I think through all of my control plane policies, right? So we haven't taken any lessons from what cloud has done in terms of its dynamic nature, its elasticity, scale out. None of those things have been brought to the data plane and the control plane of the network. And I think that is the opportunity in front of us to say, if we can do that, now we have the foundation to build a truly programmable and a truly agile network.
All right. Now, from what I understand in the 5G specs, 5G actually must be cloud native, correct?
That's right.
Why is that? What's so unique about 5G that dictates to be cloud native?
Again, this origins are very different. The origins were to say, how do we make a telecom operator innovate on multiple business models fast? And to do that, they took their lesson from the only at-scale business model that has worked, which is cloud. And they took those concepts, applied them to networking, and said the only way we can do that is all these networking services, security services, over-the-top services that operators provide need to be treated the same way as modern cloud application. And so the minute you put that in the standards, now you cannot build a 5G network without starting with those principles. But the problem is you can't take blindly what you build for a telecom operator and put it in an interface. So you now need to marry those concepts. And that's where, our concepts are start with what 5G as a standard has defined and now truly apply it to the enterprise context. And that leads you to very interesting directions.
Yeah, that was quite a radical shift in the telecom space because historically, 4G, 3G, 2G, they were just faster versions of, the original mobile network, but you didn't really change the operational structure. And I think this was, if you believe in that phrase, that necessity is the mother of invention, the service providers were faced with a pretty daunting task, right? Upgrade your networks, you don't make any more money, your operational expenses go up, and it's a losing value proposition. So I suppose in that case, this had to happen, right?
That's exactly right. But funnily enough, yes, guess who else is thinking about that exact same thing every single day? It's a networking team in every enterprise company I have spoken to, right? And that's the interesting part here.
Yeah. Now, it sounds like, when you talk about sort of the unique nature of the cloud and software, right? Some of those principles were initially brought into what's known today as software-defined networking, or SDN. How does what you're trying to do with the cloud native networking actually, how does that marry with SDN? Are they complementary? Are they in opposition? What's the relationship between the two?
I think they are certainly complementary principles. I think software-defined networking, the idea of taking control plane, data plane, splitting it apart in two different places so you have more flexibility to do it, is almost a foundational element of the 5G cloud native architecture, right? They came up with a new name called CUPS and control user plane separation, but it's really SDN in another form. So in that sense, the cloud native piece of 5G really builds on top of SDN. Now, the fact is that what it extends it to is that now you're able to actually implement that user plane further as a true cloud native microservice. And so now you have taken that further step of saying, how do I decrease the granularity at which I can manage that data plane. And I think that's the beauty of what this has done. And the second piece is, now that you make it exactly like yet another cloud application, you can run it on the same compute hardware as a regular application. And that's the other aha moment that we have had over the last 2 years with our customers, that there is no reason for us to now have separate networking hardware, separate security hardware, and separate application hardware. There's no reason for us to do that. We are reaching a place where you need to converge on the same commodity off-the-shelf hardware that can run all three. And one way to look at it is the entire data center revolution was the convergence of compute and storage controlled by software. To us, the next generation of this enterprise is the convergence of compute, storage, and networking controlled by software. Right? That's the future that we envision in this edgeless enterprise architecture.
Yeah. Now you describe this as being part of the edge or the edgeless enterprise. Is this something that you see strictly being at the edge, or is this something that will eventually permeate all the way down to the data center, campus core, those types of areas, the other parts of the network?
Yeah, we think that it is inevitable for the brains of the network, so as to speak, to be diffused across wherever it needs to be. What is really important is that the network needs to now be where the application is, right? I mean, it's almost like a twist on, we used to say the network needs to be where the user is.
Yeah.
It's almost a twist on that. Now the application has suddenly become more mobile. So your network needs to show up wherever the application is. So where could that be? That could be in each individual site, like a store. It could be at the metro edge for some of these new multi-tenant edge cloud offerings that people like AWS, Azure, GCP are going to come up with. It could be in the private data centers that these enterprises own themselves, or it could well be in the actual public cloud locations too, because the actual application could be in any of those places. And your network needs to be instantly available wherever the application is.
All right, so that actually explains the tying to the edge, because when you think of edge computing, the workloads that run there tend to be very ephemeral in nature, and so you don't really have the time. If I'm spinning up a workload or something that runs for a couple of minutes, I don't really have the time to go provision a bunch of network resources manually, right? And so
that's exactly right.
Yeah,
right. So, and it's very transient, but it's also highly dynamic.
Yes.
Right? Depending on what that particular application is going to do and what it needs, it might need an ultra low latency. At a different time, it might need a very high bandwidth. And so now your network needs to be highly agile to say, programmatically, can the application ask for what it needs?
Yeah. And anybody that works with networking will know that the network is anything but dynamic and agile, right? So that those are sort of been at odds. Now, the other term that we like to throw around in the network industry today is IBN, intent-based networking, or autonomous networking. How is this part of the journey to that? Does it replace it?
It is somewhat related to what we said earlier about how cloud networking today has only meant management of the networks, right? And I think the same model is true for autonomous/AI ops for networking. Today, what AI ops can do is react to things that happen. It cannot proactively really go influence the network to do things. And the reason for that is, going back to the construct, the underlying elements of the network functions are just not malleable enough. So you can only at best react and find what has gone wrong. So you can minimize the time to find it, but you can't change it. Once we take the step towards this truly cloud native network OS, now you have a very malleable thing. And now you can proactively try to meet the needs of these applications as opposed to only reacting to problems. So to us, AI ops is going to go through its natural evolution for networking to really say, how do we truly make them self-driving networks, not self-operating networks, which is what we are building today. And I think that's going to be, but it will undoubtedly be a journey, right? Because we are now dealing with 2 or 3 major pieces of infrastructure going through a pretty massive transformation. but it's an exciting time to be in the networking industry.
Yeah, I've used the analogy that it's a little bit like the journey to self-driving cars, where we've got a lot of cool AI features to help us park the car better, lane change alerts, so where we can react, but we can't really proactively, a little bit, I suppose, but we're still a long way away from that. So I know one of the features in the 5G spec on the carrier side is something called micro slicing. Now, you're actually bringing that into the enterprise, correct? And so I think probably a lot of the people watching this on the enterprise side really have probably never heard of micro slicing. So can you do a little drill down into that, what exactly that is and how it works?
Sure. I mean, one way to think about it is 5G, in the many lessons that it has taken from cloud, one of the lessons it took was multi-tenancy, which is to say it's a single physical infrastructure that can have multiple tenants, right? And they called it slices. They just happened to call that thing slices. And it was, again, done with an intention of creating multiple revenue streams for operators, all great. And our observation was an enterprise network is already multi-tenant in a way today. The tenants happen to be use cases and applications, right? No IT person worth their salt will say, I built the network for two things, voice and data. Nobody has ever said that, right? Everybody has to actually meet real business customers' needs. So how do we take this tool set that is defined by 3GPP and 5G for slicing and marry it to the enterprise construct of having multiple applications and each needing an SLA is the concept behind microslicing that Celona is working on. And we think of microslicing as this overall framework to say, if you built a single physical network, on top of that, you need to create your overlays. And they really together guarantee you three things. They give you the assurance of what performance you wanted from the network, right? Quality of service, throughput, whatever that might be. It gives you the assurance of the security, segmentation, and policy you wanted to apply. And the third is it determines which devices and how are they protected from other devices, right? So it's a device and application grouping in the end to give you an assurance to the end application. And the job for us was not to expose the entire mechanics and give all the gears over to the IT person, saying, here are all the gears, go put it together. If you get it right, you'll have a Swiss watch. If you don't, then you're better off buying a Quartz watch. That didn't make any sense. So our job was to really solve that internally. And that's been the journey we've been on. And the customer's reactions is, for the first time, we have the ability to give an assurance to an application from the wireless side all the way to an application, irrespective of where the application resides. And that's a powerful construct. And so that's what's exciting.
So how is that different than network segmentation or VLANs or QoS, right? All those things, what you're explaining kind of sounds like all those things.
Correct. Yeah. I think there's two key ways. One is all of those tactics that we have used have been very static in nature. So if I told you that your laptop got onto VLAN 10, for you to now say, no, it's not on VLAN 10, but to go to VLAN 20 is an act of God today in network configuration. Right?
Handful of configurations.
Yeah. So an application from its code has no way to tell the network that I would like a different slice of this network. That is a far reach today. There are 17 humans involved in making every one of those changes. So the level of programmability, the level of dynamism that the world is looking for is not where those tactics exist today. Now, we don't want to rip and replace everything. So we want a way to seamlessly fit into that. But that's one key characteristic that we are looking for. The second thing that shouldn't be underrated, and we've talked a lot in this conversation about the non-wireless part of 5G. But one of the key pieces that I started with is, for the first time, 5G as a wireless technology gives you the assurance that all that stuff you guaranteed on the wired network, I'll also guarantee over the air. And the combination of that to say, I can have mobile devices, I can have over the air without trenching cable, I can have that level of assurance from the wireless to the core of my network, extending out to wherever the application is. that level of holistic assurance has not existed prior to this.
Yeah, generally on the wired side we can, and then you sort of cross your fingers and you hope the shared spectrum works okay on the wireless side. Yeah, which is always that trade-off, right? Do we want the performance of wired, or do we want the freedom of mobility? And right. I guess I can have both. So let's say, as an enterprise IT person, I buy into this vision of the edgeless enterprise, and I move my network to be this cloud native design. What are the business benefits of that? Like, what do I get out of it as the network engineer and as the business?
Yeah, I mean, the number one thing a network engineer gets, I always say this: you get to stop being the no person in the company. Because right now, the poor people are being the people who have to say, oh, you want to bring that application? I don't know if my network's ready for that. You want to bring that? I don't know if the network's ready for that. And the number of lines of businesses that have told us that it has reached a point where we don't want to talk to our IT team. Can we find a way to just bypass them and get connectivity? Because every time we go there, they're just going to tell us no. So yeah. we need the network team to stop being the no team. And they need to be as responsive as today's cloud guys are, right? So that's their value prop, in my opinion. I think that the networking teams that realize that they can add value to the digitization of their companies by being that responsive, their careers are going to go places, in my opinion. On the line of business, honestly, I think every industry is realizing that all the hype around automation and digitization, the reality check that it needs is, do you have predictable connectivity? You can do anything you want today in the cloud. The infinite compute that it has opened up is all possible, but you need things connected. You need people connected everywhere. And that is the ultimate benefit, honestly.
Yeah, well, business agility is everything today, right? And so you're only as agile as your least agile IT component. And I think for most enterprises, that's the network by far. So, well, thanks for that explanation. Well, Rajeev Shah, CEO and co-founder of Celona Networks, thanks. That was great. Looking forward to seeing how you guys evolve, and as you get to be a bigger company. I think the whole concept of 5G in the enterprise is pretty fascinating. So, on behalf of Rajeev, I'm Zeus Kerravala from ZK Research. Don't forget to click to subscribe, and I'll see you next week on another ZKast.